on the accolades presented by many of his contemporaries, Revan was one of the greatest Force wielders of his age. But what makes Revan so interesting is the praise he received from both the Sith and the Jedi. Juhani would say that Revan was as great as any Jedi could be. Kreia would add that Revan was power. It was like staring into the heart of the Force. Even then, you could see the Jedi that he would slay etched on his soul. Revan was so unique because he ostensibly mastered both the light and dark side of the Force, able to utilize Force lightning just as well as he was able to employ healing techniques. It's quite daunting when one looks at all the tools Revan had at his disposal. Offensively, Revan was capable of telekinesis, Force lightning to the point of Force storm, Force drain, Force fear, Sith sorcery, and essence transfer. Now, there are many more abilities attributed to Revan, but I will only go over the ones that can be applied most effectively in active combat. If you wish to look into every detail of Revan's feats, I would suggest picking up his single novel, Revan, or the Dark Side Sourcebook, or Book of the Sith, or Knights of the Old Republic Campaign Guide, or play his video games, the RPG or the MMO.
Ain't nobody got time for that!
Okay, so you ain't got time for that. Another option is to read the extensive respect thread on Comic Vine by Darth Ant66. For the purposes of this video, I'll be going over his use of telekinesis, Force lightning, and Force drain. First, we have Force drain, which Revan uses throughout his time during the Mandalorian Wars, specifically during the events of Malachor V. It is also noted that Revan taught his Dark Acolytes this ability, and his teachings would go on to influence Darth Bane, and particularly Darth Traya, who would go on to drain the energies of 3 Jedi Council members. Now, I'm not saying Revan was necessarily capable of such a feat. The only time we've seen him actively use the ability was against Jorok Olin, and that was in conjunction with another Sith student. But the ability is still worth mentioning. Second, we have Revan's use of Force lightning. His use of this ability was top tier, on the levels of Darth Bane and Darth Sidious. In my personal assessment, I would place his level of power above Bane and below Sidious. Not only was his lightning powerful enough to turn his foes into blackened husk, he could turn them into smoldering ash. Finally, we have Revan's use of telekinesis, which I feel is the most viable combative ability. Not only could he utilize the standard Force push or pull, masterful in his use of saber throw, but he was also capable of Force choke. His ability with telekinesis was both latent and powerful. Within weeks of being retrained, he was able to levitate himself and several objects with ease. During the Battle of the Foundry, when he was returned to full power, he could pull down several asteroids onto his opponents. But most of all, his power was strong enough to throw Emperor Vitiate head over heel. Revan was not only devastating in his offensive efforts, but he was also capable in his defensive powers. In combat, he was highly resistant to pain, utilizing the Force to bolster his resolve and heal his wounds. He took Tuda Menace to a new level, running in line with Revan's use of both the dark and light side of the Force. When faced against Darth Nihilus and claiming himself to be Revan Reborn, he not only defended against her powerful Force lightning, but he turned it back to her with more devastation than before. Instead of just charring her skin, he turned her to ash. To ash! When faced against Emperor Vitiate, a Sith whose power had been brewing for over a millennia, he stood toe-to-toe, able to repel his lightning, but with less lethality. All of these abilities, these feats, they were all wrapped up in Revan's immense potential. He coupled Sith passion with Jedi tranquility, achieving a balance and power unmatched by all but the few. Even while drugged, even after having his memories erased, even while being kept prisoner for 300 years, his abilities and his powers remained, never faltering. Darth Malgus was very strong in the dark side of the Force. He was able to implement a variety of standard and Sith abilities, such as Force Push, Choke, Speed, and Lightning. He was so powerful in his Force Push, he can even break through the Force walls of opponents, shattering bone. Even with his varied skill set, he was able to chain them together effortlessly in his lightsaber moveset. He was also very talented in retaining his life through the dark side. After his fight with Satil Shan, he was smothered by an avalanche of rocks. Even though he was nearly crippled, his lungs were failing and his breathing wasn't easy, he was able to take on two very capable Jedi Knights and defeat them without feeling pain. Even before he relied on his crazy levels of pain tolerance, he still had an acute ability for force deflection. His pain tolerance was more of a backup when his defenses were overwhelmed. In my previous assessment of Malgus's Force Lightning, I undervalued his potential and his power. In short, he was much stronger than I thought before. During the sacking of the Jedi Temple, he was able to kill 3 Jedi with lightning, but not a lone Republic soldier. Unfortunately, I did not factor in for the time periods. My updated assessment of Malgus and his Force Lightning is as follows. Like all other Sith, he started out as a novice, becoming more proficient with each use. Though he may not have had an inherent talent for the ability like Darth Bane, his practiced use would place him near the top tier. During the Battle of Alderaan, I believe he was competent, but not yet masterful in his use of Force Lightning. When we see him on Coruscant later, he became more masterful, but by the end of the events of Deceive, he was approaching top tier. The Book of the Sith sourcebook states that Malgus was capable of Force Maelstrom, a step above standard Force Lightning and a step below Force Storm. This would place Malgus solidly on par with someone like Darth Bane, and below a true master like Darth Sidious. Essentially, Force Maelstrom was a combination of Force Barrier, Telekinesis, and Lightning. The user can engulf themselves in a protective bubble while unleashing torrents of lightning. Malgus is noted to wield the destructive power of Force Scream, shattering columns during the sacking of the Jedi Temple. This is a great ability, but it often lacks control and is utilized involuntarily by its user. It's worth noting, but it is not something that will come up often unless the user is pressed, much like Anakin Skywalker's showing in Labyrinth of Evil. Malgus' steady progression of power is further backed up by examples in his book. We are given displays of Malgus' might and rage after the Sith occupation of Coruscant, and more notably, after the death of his lover Alina. Thinking of Alina blew oxygen of embers on his anger. In life, Alina had been his weakness, a tool to be exploited by rivals. In death, she became his strength, her memory the lens of his rage. The book then goes on to describe his grasp of the Force further in his fight with Lord Audros. Malgus felt the hate pouring off of Audros, the power, but it paled in comparison to the rage and hate roiling in Malgus. Because of the death of his lover Alina, especially at his own hand, he was able to break the chains that her love held him in, unleashing a powerful beast within the depths of his soul. During his assault on Audros' estate, he would even describe himself as not just controlling the Force, but being the Force itself, feeling a unity with it he hadn't before. The description would often be attributed to the most high-level Force users, who achieved the highest state of mind with the Force. While the victor of this round is rather clear, there is still a contest. Revan was a unique Force user in his abilities to employ tactics from the light and dark, but in the dark, Malgus was quite powerful. But Revan's use of Tuda Menace and Force Lightning outmatches that of Malgus. What's more, Revan's powerful use of telekinesis was superior to Malgus. But there is an argument for Malgus being able to contend with Revan's Force abilities on a tactical level, as he was an expert at chaining his Force abilities together. Yet, Revan fought with Emperor Vitiate, whose power grew over hundreds of years. I do not think Malgus would be able to contend with Vitiate as well as Revan did by means of the Force. On top of that, Revan's potential was insanely immense. After having a mind wipe, after being drugged, after being imprisoned for 300 years, still, his power remained. His peers revered and respected him. His enemies could sense the great force within him and feared him. And very few, only the top tier, could match his power in the Force. Revan gets the edge for his Force abilities.